For 10 years, I cleaned his penthouse, and he never once looked me in the eye. Then I broke his one rule, and he destroyed his entire empire because of it. This is the story no one else knows. Don't miss a moment of what happens next. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. This story changes everything. Tell me in the comments what you think he should do now. The city whispered about the man in the tower. He was a rumor in a $5,000 suit. His name wasn't spoken, only feared. From his icy penthouse high above the streets, he controlled an empire built on silence and threat. He lived surrounded by beautiful things, but nothing alive. For 10 long years, he had a single, unbreakable rule: no one touches him. Not his bodyguards, not his business partners. His world was built on keeping everyone at arm's length, where they couldn't see the ghosts in his eyes. His new housekeeper arrived on a Tuesday. She was a quiet woman with a calm face and hands that told stories of a long, hard life. The agency said she was the best. She didn't flinch at the security scans or the armed men in the hallway. She simply nodded, collected her supplies, and began her work. She moved through the enormous, cold rooms like a shadow, fixing the disorder left by a lonely man. He watched her from a distance. He was a master of observation. He saw she didn't steal glances at the priceless art. He noticed she polished the grand piano's keys with a strange kind of reverence. One afternoon, she was cleaning the glass case that held a collection of old jazz records. A single, quiet hum escaped her lips. It was a fragment of a song, something from another time. The sound was so foreign in the silent tomb of his home that it physically startled him. Days passed. He began to notice small changes. A fresh glass of water appeared on his desk every afternoon. The bitter, cold coffee he never finished was quietly replaced with a new, warm cup. She never asked if he wanted it. She just did it. One morning, he walked into his study and saw her carefully stitching a small tear in the leather of his favorite chair. Her focus was absolute. She wasn't fixing the chair for him. She was fixing it because it was broken, and that was her job. The incident happened in the long hallway. He was passing her as she was finishing mopping the marble floor. A bodyguard, coming quickly around the corner, accidentally bumped the boss's shoulder, pushing him off balance. Instinctively, his arm flew out to steady himself. His hand landed firmly on her shoulder. The contact was electric and terrifying. He froze. The guard turned pale, expecting an explosion of rage. But the explosion didn't come. The boss was staring at his own hand, still resting on the wool of her cardigan. He expected to feel revulsion, the old, cold fury that came with invasion. Instead, he felt warmth and a solid, real presence. He snatched his hand back, as if burned. "The floor is wet," he growled, his voice rougher than he intended, and stormed away, his heart pounding like a drum. That evening, he couldn't forget it. The simple, human steadiness of her. He stood at his window, looking down at the city lights. His most dangerous associate was coming to meet him soon, a man with a violent temper and ambitious eyes. The boss felt the familiar cold dread of the meeting. Then, he looked at the empty water glass on his desk, now refilled. For the first time in 10 years, his fortress of solitude didn't feel like safety. It felt like a cage. And a single, unnoticed person had just found a key. The tension started with Carlo, his most aggressive lieutenant. Carlo came to the penthouse furious about a lost shipment, his voice booming off the marble walls. He got too close, waving his hands, his spit hitting the boss's cheek. The boss's expression went dead, a sign everyone knew meant violence was coming. He raised his hand, a silent command to his guards to grab Carlo. But from the corner of the room, a sound broke through. It was the maid, dropping a heavy silver tray onto the glass coffee table. The deafening crash made everyone jump and turn. She didn't look at the armed men. She looked directly at the boss, her eyes holding a quiet urgency. "Sir," she said, her voice steady. "The pipes in the kitchen. They're bursting. The water is everywhere." It was a lie. A brave, stupid, brilliant lie. The boss stared at her, the red haze of his anger interrupted. Carlo was confused, looking between them. The moment was broken. "Handle him," the boss ordered his guards, his eyes still locked on the maid. They dragged Carlo out. When they were alone, the silence was heavier than before. He walked slowly toward her. She didn't back away. "There is no flood," he stated, his voice low. "No," she agreed, looking down at the scattered silverware. "You interfered." "I made a noise," she corrected softly. "A noisy maid is a nuisance. A dead man in your living room is a problem for a whole week." She finally met his gaze. "The cleanup is harder." He was stunned, not by her defiance, but by her reasoning. She wasn't protecting Carlo. She was, in her own way, protecting him. From the mess, from the consequence. He saw no fear in her eyes, only a practical weariness. He turned and walked to his study without another word. That night, for the first time, he didn't hear the city's noise. He heard the echoing crash of that silver tray, a sound that had shielded him. A week later, he came home late. The penthouse was dark except for a single lamp in the living room. He found her there, not cleaning, but standing perfectly still before a large, framed photograph on the wall. It was an old picture of a younger him with a woman, his wife, on a beach, both laughing. He had kept it hidden in storage for years, but a strange impulse had made him hang it that morning. He expected her to jump, to apologize. She didn't move. She had a kind smile, the maid said quietly, not turning around. Her voice wasn't prying. It was just an observation, soft in the dark room. A bolt of pain, old and deep, shot through him. No one had mentioned his wife in this house since the funeral. "Leave it," he commanded, his voice tight. "I was just dusting," she said, finally turning. In the lamplight, he saw her eyes weren't curious. They were knowing. They held the same deep, quiet hurt he saw in the mirror. She had lost someone, too. He could see it as clearly as a scar. She picked up her dusting cloth and moved to leave. Her name was Claire, he heard himself say. The words left his mouth before he could stop them. It was the first time he'd said her name aloud in this tomb of a home. The maid paused at the doorway, her back to him. She gave a single, slow nod, as if accepting a great weight he had just shared. Then she was gone. He was left standing alone in the halo of the lamp, staring at the laughing photo, feeling more seen and more vulnerable than he had in a decade. Danger arrived in the form of a rival family. They struck at his operations downtown, a bold and messy attack. The boss knew it was a declaration of war. That night, his penthouse was a hive of grim activity. Men with guns and tense voices filled the space, making plans. The maid moved through them like a ghost, collecting glasses, untouched by the fear in the air. He was in his study, looking over a security monitor, when he saw it. A black van, with no plates, idling across the street. It had been there for 2 hours. A hit wasn't just possible, it was coming. He felt a cold certainty. He walked into the main room, his men falling silent. His eyes found the maid, quietly wiping down the kitchen counter. An unfamiliar feeling choked him, not fear for himself, but terror for her being in the crossfire. "Everyone out," he ordered his men. "New positions. Go now." They filed out quickly. When the elevator door shut, the apartment was silent again, Just him and her. He walked to the kitchen. "You need to leave," he told her, his tone leaving no argument. "Use the service elevator. Don't come back for 3 days." She looked at him, then out the vast window toward the dark street. She understood. "And you?" she asked. "That's not your concern." She put down her cloth. Instead of heading to the elevator, she walked to the massive window and began closing the automated blinds, one section at a time, plunging the room into safe, secure shadow. "A dark house looks empty," she said simply. She was protecting him again. He was a man who commanded armies, and in this moment, his best defense was a maid closing blinds. The attack never came to the penthouse. It was a diversion. His main shipping warehouse was burned to the ground. The loss was massive. Someone had given his rivals perfect information. There was a traitor in his inner circle. Paranoia poisoned everything. He trusted no one, questioned everyone. Even his guards now felt like threats. He retreated into his study, a storm of quiet fury. The maid brought him coffee. As she set the cup down, her sleeve caught on the edge of his heavy, antique desk, jostling a small, hollow bronze statue. It made a faint, metallic ping that sounded wrong. He froze. He knew every object in this room, every sound. He picked up the statue. It was too light. With a cruel twist, he broke it open. Inside was a tiny, high-tech listening device. A bug. His blood turned to ice. All his private conversations, his vulnerabilities, his moment with the photograph, all heard. He looked up at her, standing there, her face pale. Every awful lesson of his life screamed one truth. Betrayal always comes from the closest point of access. She had the perfect opportunity. She was always there, unseen, unnoticed. The one person he'd begun to let his guard down around. He stood up, slowly, the broken pieces of the statue in his hand. The emotion in his eyes wasn't just anger, it was a devastating hurt. "How long?" he asked, his voice deathly quiet. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. He saw it as a confession. The fragile connection between them shattered in that instant, replaced by the cold, familiar landscape of betrayal. He had been a fool. He didn't have her arrested. Not yet. He had her sit in the chair opposite his desk, a single guard at the door. He paced, laying out the cold facts. The bug was state-of-the-art, FBI or rival family. It was planted in an object only she dusted daily. She had unfettered access. She was the obvious, logical answer. "Give me one reason," he demanded, "why I shouldn't end this right now." She looked smaller in the chair, but her gaze was direct, filled with a sorrow that seemed too real to be fake. "The man who cleans the windows on the outside," she said, her voice tired. "He was here last week. He moved all the desk items to clean. He was nervous. His hands shook." She took a deep breath. "And my son, he's in prison. Upstate. 10 years ago, he was driving a car for men who worked for you. He made a mistake. He's paid for it every day since." The boss stopped pacing. This was a twist he didn't expect. "What does that have to do with this?" "The man who visited me last month," she said, a tear finally escaping. "He said he could make my son's time easier. Safer. All I had to do was tell him about your schedule, your moods. I told him nothing. But he must have planted that thing when I wasn't looking." She wasn't asking for mercy. She was just stating the truth. She was a target, not a traitor. The boss sat down, the fight gone out of him. The real enemy wasn't this tired woman. It was someone who knew how to find pressure points, who used a mother's love as a weapon. They had targeted her because she was close to him. Her crime wasn't betrayal. It was being used as a weakness. He dismissed the guard. They were alone again. "You should have told me," he said, the anger replaced by exhaustion. I was protecting him, she whispered. And I was protecting you from having to make this choice. In that moment, he made his decision. The ruthless boss chose to protect her. He would use his power to shield her son. And he would find the real snake in his garden. The war was no longer just about business. It was personal. The dynamic in the penthouse changed completely. It was no longer just a boss and an employee. It was an alliance. He had his tech expert sweep the entire apartment, finding 2 more bugs. He didn't send her away. Instead, he gave her a simple, secure cell phone. If you see anything, anyone, you call the number on speed dial. Only that number. She took it, nodding silently. He then made a single, powerful call to a contact in the state prison system. Her son was quietly moved to a safer unit within 24 hours. He told her it was done with a simple nod. She didn't thank him with words. That afternoon, she made his dinner from scratch for the first time. A simple pot roast, the smell of it warm and homely, filling the sterile space. It was her thanks. He ate every bite. The boss knew the traitor was still watching. He decided to use the expectation against them. He staged a loud, angry argument with the maid in the hallway, where he knew a hidden camera was likely. He yelled that she was fired, that she was a security risk. She played her part, looking wounded, gathering her things. A car was sent to supposedly take her to the bus station. But the car drove to a safe apartment he owned across town. Meanwhile, he let word leak through specific channels that he was vulnerable, distracted by the betrayal of his domestic staff. It was fate. He waited in the dark penthouse alone for the rats to get brave and come out. The rivals took the bait. Believing his inner circle was fractured and his guard down, they made a direct, audacious move. They attacked his most legitimate front, a downtown gentlemen's club he owned. It wasn't a subtle hit. It was a violent takeover, broadcast on police scanners. From the safe apartment, the maid listened to the scanner app on her new phone, her heart pounding. She heard the address, the chaos. Without thinking of the danger, she used the speed dial. He answered on the first ring. Her voice was fierce with a fear she hadn't shown for herself. "They're at your club. It's loud. It's public. It's a trap for you." He was already moving, but her warning confirmed his plan. He wasn't going to the club. He was going to the source. While his men defended the club, the boss and his most trusted driver went to a nondescript office building. It was the legal front for his rival. Using the distraction, they went inside. In the rival's private office, the boss found more than he expected. On the computer screen, pulled up but not closed, was a live feed from the hidden penthouse cameras. And in the desk drawer, a file. Not on him. On her. Photos of her son, her old apartment, her sister. The rival hadn't just wanted to plant bugs. He'd been planning to kidnap her to control the boss. The cold fury that returned to the boss then was older and more terrifying than any business grudge. This was about violation. Convinced she was in immediate danger at the safe house, the boss broke his own protocol. He raced there himself, his mind filled with grim scenarios. He burst through the door, gun drawn, ready for anything. He found her sitting calmly at the small kitchen table. In front of her was a steaming cup of tea, and on the floor, tied up with extension cords and bleeding from a nasty gash on his head, was one of the rival soldiers, groaning. She looked up at the boss. "He picked the lock," she said softly. "I used your grandmother's silver clock from the box. It's heavy." She had protected herself. The boss lowered his weapon, a wave of stunned admiration washing over the fear. She was far from helpless. The captured soldier, under intense pressure, gave a name. The traitor in the boss's organization wasn't a low-level soldier or a jealous lieutenant. It was his own lawyer, a man who had been with him for 15 years. The man who knew every legal loophole, every secret deal. The betrayal was a deeper cut than any from a rival. The lawyer had been siphoning money for years and had cut a deal with the rival family for immunity and a bigger share. He was the one who had ensured the maid's background check cleared. He had set her up from the beginning. The boss felt a profound, weary disgust. The enemy was within the walls he'd built himself. The boss summoned the lawyer to the penthouse under the pretense of an emergency meeting about the club attack. The maid was back, positioned in the kitchen, within earshot. The boss confronted him calmly, laying out the evidence. The lawyer, slick and confident, tried to talk his way out, then tried to threaten with his legal knowledge. "You touch me, and everything you own will be exposed," the lawyer sneered. The boss simply smiled a cold, mirthless smile. "Who said I would touch you?" From the kitchen, the maid picked up the house phone and spoke one word to the waiting line. "Now." The front door opened, and two stern men in cheap suits flashed federal badges. The lawyer's face went from smug to sheer panic. The FBI agents read him his rights. They had been building a RICO case on the rival family for years, and the lawyer, in his greed, had handed them everything on a silver platter with his insider testimony deal. The boss had made a call, not to a fixer, but to a federal agent whose son he'd once quietly helped. It was the ultimate trade. "You thought you were playing both sides," the boss said, his voice like gravel. "But you were just the prize in a bigger game." As the agents led the stammering lawyer away, the boss didn't feel victory. He felt empty. The machinery of his old life was finally chewing itself apart. He stood in the silent foyer for a long time. The maid came out from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel.
She didn't speak.
She simply walked to the bar, poured 2 fingers of amber whiskey into a glass, and brought it to him. He took it, his fingers brushing hers. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was full. They had just survived a war, not with bullets, but with trust. He finally looked at her. "It's over," he said, meaning more than just the lawyer. But she shook her head slowly. "For you," she said. "Maybe. For me, they know where my son is. They know my face." The fear was back in her eyes, not for herself, but for her child. The boss saw the truth. His solution had only solved his problem. Hers remained. He downed the whiskey, the burn focusing his mind. The old way was gone. A new, more dangerous idea was forming. He had to finish this completely for her. "Get your coat," he said, turning toward his study. "We're going for a drive." She didn't question him. She trusted him now, completely. He opened his wall safe, not the one for money, but a smaller, deeper one. He pulled out a simple, worn leather address book. Inside were not just numbers, but decades-old favors, secrets, and debts from a world that existed before he built his fortress. He was about to call in the most dangerous one of all. They drove for 2 hours in silence, leaving the city lights far behind. They ended up at a modest, well-kept house in a quiet suburb. An older man with calm eyes and a retired cop's posture answered the door. He was the former head of security for a rival family, a man the boss had spared 20 years ago during a territorial dispute. The man looked at the boss, then at the woman beside him, and nodded. He let them in. Over bitter coffee, the boss laid it out. He needed the rival family's attention permanently diverted. He needed the threat to the maid and her son erased. The old security man listened. He named a price. "Not money. The warehouse on the docks," he said. "You let my nephew's shipping company have that contract." It was a piece of the boss's legitimate business. The boss agreed, without hesitation. The old man then laid out the rival boss's one true weakness, his own son, a reckless, addicted gambler in massive debt to a casino in Vegas, a casino not owned by either family. It was the perfect pressure point. The plan was set. The old man would make a call to Vegas. The debt would be called in immediately, with violent consequences promised. The rival boss would be forced to fly to Vegas to save his heir, pulling all his resources and focus away from the city and away from the maid. It was a temporary fix, but it would buy them time. As they drove back, the maid finally spoke. "You gave up part of your business. For me." He kept his eyes on the road. "It's just a building," he said. But they both knew it was more. It was the first piece of his empire he'd willingly dismantled. Back in the penthouse, a strange peace descended. The lawyer was gone. The rival boss, they learned, had indeed scrambled a private jet to Vegas. The immediate fire was out. For the first time, there was no business to conduct, no imminent threat. The boss didn't know what to do with himself. He wandered the rooms, a restless ghost. He found her in the library, carefully repairing the torn page of a first edition book. He sat in the armchair across from her. He watched her work. The silence stretched, but it wasn't the old, empty silence. It was comfortable. "What will you do," he asked, "when this is truly over?" She didn't look up. "See my son. Find a smaller apartment. Maybe work in a library." A simple, quiet dream. A dream his world had always crushed. "You could stay here," he said, the words out before he could judge them. "The job is yours. The apartment is safe." She put her needle down. She looked at him, not as her employer, but as a man. "And what will you do?" she asked, turning the question back on him. He had no answer. His entire identity was the empire, the fear, the control. Without the war to fight, who was he? He stared at his own hands, which had built so much and held on to nothing. "I don't know," he admitted, a stunning confession of vulnerability. In that shared moment of uncertainty, the last wall between them crumbled to dust. The call from Vegas came 3 days later. The plan had worked too well. The rival boss had gotten his son out, but it had cost him everything, a huge chunk of his capital. He was wounded, desperate, and therefore more dangerous than ever. He was coming back to the city with one goal: total annihilation of the man who had engineered his humiliation. The news was a cold splash of reality. The boss's protective detail doubled. The penthouse became a bunker again. He saw the fear return to the maid's eyes. Not for herself, but for the life she'd just glimpsed. He knew then that buying time wasn't enough. As long as he was who he was, she would never be safe. The solution was both simple and unthinkable. He called his accountant and his remaining loyal lieutenant. He gave 2 orders. First, begin the legal, quiet process of selling off all his legitimate businesses. Second, prepare to permanently dismantle and distribute his illicit operations to his remaining crews, with the lieutenant taking the lead. He was retiring, not to an island, but to obscurity. He was giving it all up. When his lieutenant protested, the boss cut him off. "It's done," he said, finality